The stories of Jesus. In this video we have compiled all of our Jesus Bible stories into one video, so feel free to use the timestamps on the screen to watch that particular section, or sit back and enjoy all of our Jesus Bible stories. The Christmas story. The angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and told her that she would have a baby. Angel Gabriel told Mary that her baby would be God's son, and he should be called Jesus. Mary was shocked by this, but knew that she was very special to be chosen by God. Mary told Joseph what Gabriel had told her. They prepared for the arrival of the special baby. Mary was engaged to Joseph. An angel also appeared to him and explained about Mary's special baby. At the same time, there was a census of all people in the land. This meant that everyone had to travel to the town of their birth. Mary and Joseph travelled to Bethlehem, the town of Joseph's birth. Mary travelled on a donkey as she was heavily pregnant and unable to walk such a long distance. The journey was very long. Finally, Mary and Joseph arrived in the town of Bethlehem, the city of David. Unfortunately, it was very busy with fellow travellers, and there was nowhere left to stay in the town. Eventually, Joseph found an innkeeper who had a stable outside for his animals. Mary and Joseph settled in the stable alongside the animals. That night, Jesus was born in a stable. Mary placed the baby Jesus in a manger, wrapped in swaddling cloths. It was a very humble beginning for Jesus, as he was the Son of God. Later that night, an angel appeared to shepherds who were tending to their sheep on a hillside. The angel told the shepherds that a Saviour had been born and that they should visit him in Bethlehem. The shepherds immediately left to find Jesus, following a bright star over the stable. After a long journey, the shepherds made it to Bethlehem to visit Jesus. In the east, wise men spotted a very bright star in the sky. They knew that this meant that a king had been born, so they travelled with different gifts to give to this new king. On the way, the wise men visited King Herod to ask whether he knew anything about the new king and where he was. He was worried about the birth of a new king. He told the wise men to return and tell him where the new king was once they found him. The wise men followed the bright star all the way to Bethlehem and found Jesus. They gave Jesus gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That night, the wise men had a dream warning them not to tell King Herod that Jesus was in Bethlehem. Wanting Jesus to keep safe, they returned home. King Herod discovered Jesus was in Bethlehem. He ordered all young boys in Bethlehem to be killed by his soldiers in order for the new king to be removed. That night, Joseph had a dream about Angel Gabriel, telling him to take Mary and Jesus to Egypt to escape the danger. Mary, Joseph and Jesus travelled to Egypt immediately to escape King Herod's soldiers, and they were safe. This is the incredible story of Jesus' birth. The baptism of Jesus. A long time ago, there lived a man called John the Baptist. He was Jesus' cousin. Like Jesus, John was a preacher. As a preacher, he helped Jesus spread the good news about God. John taught people about forgiveness and how they should say sorry for the things they have done wrong. He felt that by asking for forgiveness, people would feel better about themselves and be kinder to others. John the Baptist lived a simple life out in the wilderness. He believed that having a lot of clothes, possessions, or a big house was not important. Instead, he wore clothes made from camel's hair, sandals, and a leather belt around his waist. Most nights John slept outside, as he did not have a home. Sometimes he stayed with friends. He ate locusts and wild honey. Locusts are insects which are a good source of protein. Wild honey is thought to be one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. When people heard that John the Baptist was in their area, they came from all over Jerusalem. People from the region of Judea and Jordan travelled to John to be baptized and asked for forgiveness for their sins. One day, some church leaders called Pharisees and Sadducees came to be baptized, but John had a stern warning for them. He told them that they needed to realize the mistake they had made, to feel bad about them and to ask for forgiveness. However, the men did not feel they had done anything wrong and were not sorry, so John refused to baptize them. Next, the tax collectors arrived to be baptized. They asked John, "Sir, what should we do?" And John told them to only collect the amount of money they had been told to. Soldiers arrived, asking, "What shall we do?" And John said to them, "Do violence to no man, nor accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages." As people continued going to John, they wondered if he was the Messiah. John heard the rumours and told them, "I baptize you with water, but one mightier than I is coming, whose sandals I am not worthy to undo. He shall baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire." Jesus travelled from Galilee to Jordan to be baptized by his cousin. John the Baptist was shocked when Jesus asked him. He felt like Jesus should be baptizing him. "You should be baptizing me. I cannot baptize you," John said to Jesus. Jesus disagreed, explaining that it was important to him to be baptized as an example to others, and that it was important for others to witness it. So John baptized his cousin. John put his hand onto Jesus' back and placed him under the water. Then he brought him back up. Once Jesus was baptized, the heavens opened and the Holy Spirit came upon him, like a dove resting on his shoulder. Suddenly, a voice from heaven declared, "This is my cherished Son, and I am very delighted with him." Thanks for watching and listening. Jesus turns water into wine. One day, Jesus was at a wedding in the town of Cana. Everyone had been having such a great time that nobody noticed the wine had run out. Mary, Jesus' mother, knew that her boy could sort this problem out. "Do whatever he tells you," she told the servants. Jesus told them to fill some empty jars with water. They were skeptical that putting water into jars would do anything at all, but they obeyed Jesus anyway and filled the jars. "Now go and pour some out for the guests," Jesus said. To everybody's amazement, the jars now contained the best wine they'd tasted all evening. Everybody we know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests have had their fill, they bring in the cheap stuff. "But you've saved the best till now," said the guests. This was Jesus' first miracle. After that, he went on to perform many more. Thanks for watching and listening. The loaves and the fishes, also known as feeding the 5,000. Wherever Jesus went, big crowds followed. Jesus and his disciples went across the lake on a boat. But when they got to the other side, another crowd was waiting, wanting Jesus to speak. Jesus felt sorry for them, so began to teach them about God. It started to get late, and the crowd were feeling tired and hungry. Jesus told the disciples they could give the crowd food, but there were 5,000 people. There wasn't enough food. There was a boy in the crowd who had brought his own food. There were 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Jesus had the crowd sit in groups of 50 and 100. Jesus took the loaves and gave thanks to God. Then he broke them and gave them to his disciples. As the disciples handed out the bread, it multiplied and made more bread. The same happened with the fish. After everyone was fed, there were 12 baskets worth of food left. The crowds were amazed. They said, "This man must be the Son of God." This was the story of the loaves and the fishes. Thanks for watching and listening.
Jesus calms the storm. One day, Jesus and his disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee. Suddenly, a huge storm broke out. Waves crashed against the boat, and it started to sink. Jesus just slept, whilst around him the disciples were terrified of drowning. "Teacher, is it nothing to you that we are going down?" cried the disciples. Jesus woke up, and told the wind and the waves to settle down. The wind ran out of breath, and the sea was as smooth as glass. Jesus asked, "Why were you so frightened? Did you have no faith?" The amazed disciples asked, "Who is this man? The wind and wave obey him." This was just one of the miracles Jesus performed. Those who followed him soon realized that Jesus was truly the Son of God.
Jesus walks on water. Later one day, Jesus sent his disciples in a boat to cross the lake ahead of him. Jesus was praying up in the mountains and saw the boat was far away. That night, the sea was quite rough. Suddenly, the disciples saw Jesus coming towards them, walking on water. They thought it was a ghost, and they were all scared. Jesus reassured them that it was him. "It is I," said Jesus. "Don't be afraid." Peter wanted to walk on water. He stepped out of the boat and found himself walking on water too. Then Peter saw the wind and started to feel afraid. As soon as he did, he started to sink. "Lord, save me," Peter cried. Jesus held his hand and helped Peter out. "You of little faith," Jesus said, "why did you doubt?" They all climbed into the boat and the wind calmed down. All the disciples were amazed and said, "Jesus must be the Son of God." Thanks for watching and listening. Jesus heals a blind man. One day, as Jesus walked along with his disciples, they saw a man who was begging at the roadside. The man had been born blind. Jesus walked over to the man and said, "While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Then he spat on the dusty ground, mixed it into some mud, and gently rubbed the mud on the man's eyes. Then Jesus said to the man, "Now go and wash your face in the pool of Siloam." The man returned, overjoyed that he could now see. The man's neighbour had seen him begging and said, "Are you the same man who was begging?" Others said, "No, that's not him. He was blind." But the man said, "It is me. I was blind, but now I can see." The man explained, "The man called Jesus came along. He made some mud and rubbed it on my eyes. Then he told me to wash in the pool of Siloam. When I did, I could see." This is the story of Jesus healing a blind man. Thanks for watching and listening. Jesus heals 10 men with leprosy. After months of teaching, performing miracles, and healing the sick, Jesus decided to return home. As he travelled through Samaria and Galilee, he passed through a town where he was greeted by lepers. The 10 lepers stood at a distance, proclaiming, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." In the time of Jesus, being ill was often regarded as a sign of sin. The men were begging for help, knowing that only God could cure them. As Jesus was a well-known person at the time, the men recognized him and probably knew of miracles he had performed on others of faith. Jesus looked at the men and told them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." The men were doubtful, as they had already been to the priest, and he had turned them away. But they did as Jesus told them to. As they travelled towards the priest, they began to heal. The men couldn't believe their eyes. All the men carried on, except for one. When the thankful leper realised that he was healed, he turned around and praised God. He fell to Jesus' feet and, kneeling in front of him, cried with thankfulness. Jesus sent the men to the priest because in those times, when a person was cured from sickness, they were supposed to visit the temple and present themselves to the priest. Jesus told the men to go to the temple before they were even cured. The men did not know that they would be healed, but they had faith in God, so they followed Jesus' orders. Suddenly, Jesus said, "Why not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except for this man?" Jesus said to the Samaritan, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." Jesus was disappointed in the other men who did not say thank you, but he appreciated the man that did return. Thanks for watching and listening. The Story of Easter. Yes, I have travelled to Jerusalem before, only once, many years ago, when I was a girl. We came for the Passover festival, and I was so excited about my first visit to the Holy City. I tried hard to imagine just how big the crowds filling the streets would be. I was sure that the feast would be extraordinary. Sure enough, something extraordinary did happen that year. It was all to do with a man named Jesus. Jerusalem bustled. The inns and guest houses for miles around were full to bursting, and tents crowded the slopes below the city. In the shadow of the Golden Gate we sampled fish and fruit. Merchants sold bleating sheep and cooling doves. Pilgrims exchanged their money for tiring coin, and haggled over the price of prayer shawls and shofars. The market was so busy that it was impossible to walk without being jabbed by elbows or trampled by sandals. That's when we overheard the gossip. "The King of the Jews is here! Move aside!" Gabbling and pushing, the crowds drew back. Some laid palm fronds on the dusty road. Whoever was coming, he had to be really important. Then we saw him, a man riding a donkey. He didn't look rich, powerful, or special in any way, but all around the crowds began to shout, "Blessed is the King! Peace in heaven!" "Who is he?" said a voice, and answers flew from every side. "He's a teacher." "No, he's a madman. Wherever he goes, he cures the sick, the deaf, and the blind. Wherever he goes, he angers people. He's the Messiah, the Son of God. Look, he's going into the temple. Let's hear what he has to say." Some doubted him. Some were devoted to him. But everyone swept eagerly into the temple. Little did anyone know that at that very moment, a few streets away, a plot was brewing. A plot against Jesus. While the crowd heard Jesus preach, the high priest Caiaphas met with all the religious leaders. They had gathered at his palace to discuss how they could arrest Jesus, arrest him and kill him. "That young upstart, who's he think he is? He says that he's the Son of God. He must be dealt with before he turns the people against us." Caiaphas called for order. "The people are listening to this man, and soon they will stop listening to us. I have been high priest for too long to let this commoner steal my power. If we condemn Jesus publicly, the crowd will turn on him. But first, we must find him when he is alone." That's when a man arrived at their gathering. His name was Judas Iscariot, and he was one of Jesus' disciples. "What will you give me if I agree to betray Jesus?" asked Judas. Caiaphas counted out 30 silver pieces into Judas's palm. Soon afterwards, Jesus sat with his followers in a house in the city as they ate their Passover meal. He shared bread and wine with the disciples, saying, "The bread is my body, and this wine is my blood." Then he looked around at the 12 men who travelled with him wherever he went and said, "Soon you will all leave me." Shocked, the disciples insisted that it wasn't so. None was surer than Peter. "My Lord, I never would." "Peter," said Jesus kindly, "you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows for morning." As Peter sat speechless, Jesus continued, "What's more, one person here will be my betrayer. This is the last supper that I will share with you, for tomorrow I will die." The disciples fell silent. Then Jesus said, "But after that I shall rise and go north to Galilee. Meet me there." Just imagine the look on the disciples' faces then. After supper, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. That night, the air of Jerusalem hung still and heavy with the scent of almond blossom. The olive trees stood guard like gnarled sentinels. Though he had seemed calm at supper, Jesus was troubled. "Please watch over me," he told his companions as he knelt to pray. Some say he prayed so earnestly that an angel appeared to him and blessed him with strength for the trials ahead. He prayed so feverishly that sweat poured down his face. He prayed for so long that when he returned to his disciples, they were sleeping. "Wake up," he commanded. But at that moment, the darkness of evening was dispelled by golden light, which flooded into the garden and bounded from tree to tree. Priests and soldiers crowded into the garden, waving torches and clubs. As Jesus turned to face the light, Judas stepped forward from among them and greeted him with a kiss on the cheek. This was the signal that the soldiers had been waiting for. With a roar, they surged forward, seized Jesus, and marched him from the garden. As Jesus was led away, the disciples fled into the darkness. The soldiers led Jesus to the palace of Caiaphas. Peter followed at a distance, desperate for news. He trembled from head to foot. As Peter waited in the courtyard to hear what the elders would accuse Jesus of, a servant girl noticed him. "You're one of Jesus' men, aren't you?" she asked. Peter jumped. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said at once. "Yes, you are," said another girl. "I can tell by your accent." "I don't know the man." You do. I saw you together," said a third. No, cried Peter. At that moment, the rooster crowed to signal morning, and Peter remembered what Jesus had foretold. As he ran from the courtyard, shame burned in his chest. But all that I only learned later. The first I heard of it was in the morning outside the governor's palace. The Roman governor's name was Pontius Pilate, and that morning he brought Jesus and another prisoner before the crowd. The priests had accused him of blasphemy. The governor did not like the people calling him king. Neither the priests nor Pilate had found enough evidence of Jesus' wrongdoings to sentence him to death. So Pilate had decided to let the people decide his fate. "Since it is the Passover, you may choose one prisoner to go free," Pilate announced. "The first is Barabbas, a rebel and a murderer. The other is Jesus, whom you call King of the Jews." At that, the crowd near the steps began to chant, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Jesus' face didn't change. He wasn't shocked or angry. It was as if he expected this. Pilate asked the crowd, "What crime is he guilty of?" Undeterred, the crowd chanted louder and louder. At last, Pilate shrugged. "Fine, Barabbas will be freed and Jesus will be crucified. I wash my hands of this." On Pilate's orders, Jesus was marched away and dragged into the palace. We heard Jesus' cries as they beat him. Soon the soldiers began to laugh. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they mocked. "Hail, hail!" When they pulled Jesus outside, we saw what the soldiers had done. He was dressed in a richly coloured robe, like a king. On his head rested a crown of thorns. The soldiers spat at him, struck him, and stripped him of his kingly robe. But the crown remained, its cruel thorns digging into Jesus' flesh. So Jesus was led to Golgotha, the place of the skull. Some say that he carried his own cross, and others say that the soldiers made a man called Simon of Cyrene carry it most of the way. Jesus was one of 3 to be crucified that day. Everyone watched as the soldiers offered him bitter wine, and as he refused it, everyone held their breath as the soldiers divided up Jesus' clothes. Then the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross by his hands and feet and hoisted him aloft. Above him hung a sign, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." We waited. At noon the sky turned black, and still we waited. At 3 Jesus cried out with a sound that seemed to shatter the sky. The earth shook. Quaking, the centurion who guarded Jesus cried out, "Surely he was the Son of God!" A rich man named Joseph of Arimathea asked the governor of Jesus' body. With Pilate's permission, he wrapped Jesus in linen cloth and carried him away. Joseph had a tomb close by, hewn from rock. He placed Jesus inside. Nearby stood the women who followed Jesus. Among them was Mary Magdalene, who had travelled with Jesus through Galilee ever since Jesus had healed her. The women watched somberly as Joseph's servant rolled a huge stone across the entrance of the tomb. Jesus had been betrayed and denied, and now he lay in a tomb. But that wasn't the end of the story. The next day was the Sabbath, a day of rest in the midst of festivities. The following day, the third day after Jesus' death, something very strange happened. That morning, as the sun rose, Mary Magdalene and the other women returned to the tomb with spices to anoint Jesus' body. The crunching of their feet broke the stillness of the morning, and the air was threaded with the scent of blossom. As they entered the garden, a sight greeted the women that made them stop in their tracks. The stone covering the tomb's entrance had been rolled away. Nervously, the women stepped closer. Inside the tomb, they saw an angel with a face like lightning and robes as white as snow. "Don't be afraid," said the angel. "Jesus is not here. He has risen, as he said he would." The women rushed from the tomb, full of joy, to tell the disciples what they had seen, and from there the news spread all over Jerusalem. Some say that Jesus appeared to the women right there in the garden. Some say that he met his disciples on the road to Emmaus, or on a mountain, or at a feast in Galilee. They all say that what he prophesied was fulfilled, that after he was crucified, he rose from the dead. But all this was many years ago now. What's that? Who do I think Jesus really was? I think it's a matter of faith. Thanks for watching and listening. We hope you've enjoyed all of our Jesus Bible stories. Make sure to check out some of our other videos on the Twinkl YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.